They're going to honor him. One of our organizations up so he was going to go. calling anything. Yeah. That's what it is.
Right down here.
Down here, okay. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe Latham's boycotting his own meeting. Come more goddamn wires here.
All right, sir.
I'm fine. I'm trying to get my
The cord's all
the
messed up.
cords all, yeah.
Oh, it's taped down there.
There you go. Talking to the machine.
How are you,
What's
sir?
Good, Tom. How you doing?
Great
Good morning. How are you? Mr. Wonderful One?
Huh?
I said great one. I said, Mr. Wonderful One, how are you? Watch that game last night? Did you watch that game last night?
No.
No?
They were honoring Iowa at the Arboretum last night.
Oh, okay.
So I had to go to a little gala dinner out there. How are ya? Good.
I guess Ryan is not coming. He's ill. And I don't know if Rice.
Is Loie coming?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, she's here.
He is here. Yeah. Mr. Roger.
What happened to him?
Yeah, is it gallstones? Kidney stones or
Kidney
something
stones?
like
Is
that?
is he recuperating at home or is he in the hospital?
Is he in Kentucky? Here.
Let's follow the Mertha rule. 5 minutes? Huh?
I don't know how many more we have.
Are we still on for the 27th? Huh? You know what, I'll talk to you later. I'll just wait till.
Yeah.
That's all right, now that we know. I'll see you later. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, that's fine. 50-50. Okay. Look at that smiling face, bright colors.
Sorry, Granger and I were trying to.
Not a problem. No problem. Be careful this cord, okay? Are you okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's taped.
Mr. Ryan won't be here because he's out ill. Oh. Got the flu.
This mic is on. Okay. Sure.
Good morning, everyone. The subcommittee will come to order. Today we're meeting to consider the fiscal year 2014 Transportation Housing Urban Development Bill. The bill before the subcommittee today was written under an allocation of $44.1 billion compared to fiscal year 2013 level of $51.8 billion. That's before you factor in the sequester. Cutting over $7 billion in programs was extremely challenging. It's not an easy task, and we had some tough choices, and we were able to meet three main priorities: MAP 21 programs, air traffic controllers, and housing renewals. The bill provides funding for the FAA to keep air traffic controllers on the job and not disrupt air traffic control. We're able to preserve highway safety and transit programs at the MAP 21 authorized levels. The bill also funds all existing transit full funding agreements and all proposed new starts. The bill funds housing aid for every family receiving assistance at the beginning of fiscal year 2014, and the bill funds renewals for homeless, elderly, and disabled programs. Veterans vouchers are fully funded at $75 million to serve an additional 10,000 homeless vets. Unfortunately, to meet these priorities under our allocation, we had to provide lower numbers for other parts of the bill. CDBG is funded at $1.6 billion and home is funded at $700 million. There are difficult trade-offs, but we still did our best to provide adequate funding, protect higher priority programs, and eliminate duplication, waste, fraud, and abuse. We also had to make some tough choices to defer investments for future years. For example, we fund next-gen programs currently being deployed, but had to make reductions in programs that can be deferred or scaled back without an impact to safety or operations in 2014. Despite these numbers, I hope you'll agree that we tried to approach the bill with a spirit of fairness and balance, given the priorities of the bill and the allocation that we received. Finally, I'd ask members to hold any amendments to a full committee, which is scheduled to meet next Thursday, June 27th, to consider this bill. I'd like to thank the budget offices of the departments and agencies funded in the legislation. Your timely responses to our questions have proved to be invaluable to meeting the many challenges of drafting the bill. I'd also like to thank each member of the subcommittee for your attendance at the hearings today and this year, and your interest and participation in the process. And I'd especially like to thank Mr. Pasteur and his crack staff for their great communication and camaraderie in this endeavor. I won't say it was cooperation, since you aren't a huge fan of the product, but thank you very much. I also want say thank you to the great majority staff, and Dina and crew did a great job putting together a very difficult bill here. So that concludes my remarks, and I look forward to a very brief discussion, and I'll recognize our ranking member, my good friend, Mr. Pastor, for his opening statement.
Well, good morning, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much. I want to begin by thanking you and your staff for always being willing to listen to our concerns and for keeping an open dialogue as we have moved through the process. We had a good series of oversight and budget hearings earlier this year that highlighted many of the challenges facing our nation's transportation and housing programs. Unfortunately, you received an impossible allocation, and the bill we're considering today does not adequately address the infrastructure and housing needs that were articulated during our hearing process. As a result, the FY 2014 bill makes deep cuts to the capital programs of the Federal Aviation Administration, Amtrak, and the Federal Transit Administration's Capital Investment Grant Program. Within HUD, the bill reduces funding, as you mentioned, for CDBG, Community Development Block Grant Program, to $1.6 billion, which is the lowest level since the program was created in 1975. The home program that you also mentioned is funded at $700 million, the lowest level since the program began in 1992. Finally, I do want to commend you, Mr. Chairman, for funding the critical safety missions of the Department of Transportation and for honoring the obligation limitations in the surface and aviation bills. In addition, while there are reductions to the FAA's operation account, I hope there are sufficient funds to avoid additional furloughs. The chairman has also included sufficient funding to move 10,000 more homeless veterans off the street and into housing. Despite the chairman's efforts, I have great concern with this bill as it is currently written. I am hopeful that we can achieve a more realistic allocation as the appropriation process moves forward this year. I yield back my time, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pastor. I'd like to recognize the full committee ranking member, Ms. Lowy. Thank you for being here this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate your efforts to put this bill together. I also want to thank Ranking Member Pastor for his leadership as the new ranking member of the subcommittee. The chair and ranking member exemplify the spirit and history of bipartisan cooperation on this committee. However, this bill is funded at $44.1 billion, 15% less than the FY13 enacted level, $4.4 billion below the sequestration level. Chairman Latham tried to produce a reasonable bill, but the unacceptable low allocation thwarted his efforts. The mark before us halves funding for the Community Development Block Grant Program to states, counties, and cities, further impairing the economic recovery across the entire country. It halves funding for the Healthy Homes and Lead Hazard Control Program, which risks the health of countless children by exposing them to lead, mold, and other contaminations. Ensures that the demand for affordable housing continues to greatly exceed the supply by cutting funding for the home program to the lowest level in the program's history. Terminates the much-needed update of the environmental impact statement on the Northeast Corridor, dramatically underfunds infrastructure investments along the corridor, slows down the FAA's progress on implementing a next-generation air traffic control system. Air travelers must not face furlough-related delays, but they will likely continue to be frustrated with the pace of air travel because investments aren't being made to meet the technological needs of a growing aviation system. The bill also includes a controversial rider prohibiting funds for California's high-speed rail. This program has been approved by the voters, funded by the legislature, and the California delegation overwhelmingly opposed the rider last year on the floor of the House. On a positive note, I want to thank the chairman for several priorities, including honoring the MAP 21 levels for surface transportation programs, avoiding furloughs of FAA employees, funding a new round of vouchers for the Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing Program for homeless veterans. However, the overall allocation provided this committee by the Ryan budget resolution was unworkable from the start. It forced impossible choices. It is predictably creating winners and losers among our 12 subcommittees. Unfortunately, the inadequate allocation has resulted in an unacceptable bill that I cannot support. It is my sincere hope that we can improve this bill as the process moves forward, but that cannot happen unless a larger budget agreement is reached and sequestration is addressed. I again wish to reiterate my concern about any delay in those discussions. There are only 3.5 months until the end of the fiscal year. A deal must be reached soon, or most of this year's appropriations bills stand no chance. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's clear to me that you're not very happy with this process, and I do hope that there are enough people in the majority in the Congress will understand the reality and the impact of the damage that these bills are doing to our economy, and we could come up with a complete deal as soon as possible so we can move forward and continue to create jobs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Lowy. I guess I can put you down as undecided. Anyway.
She's thinking about it.
I would hope.
Mr. Quigley?
I would hope that we could work together, given the unhappiness on both sides of the aisle, in this bill and other bills, and make it clear to the leadership that we have to sit down. Because frankly, to come to Washington every week and play these games and waste our time, to me, is outrageous. So I look forward to working in a bipartisan way, which we've always done, and produce bills that are really going to continue to see our economy grow and create jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lowy. Mr. Quigley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, I want to associate myself with the positive remarks as well from the ranking member of the full committee and the ranking member of the subcommittee for your efforts. I understand the difficult position that you were put in, and I realize this bill is an attempt on the part of the subcommittee to do the best we can with the dismal numbers we were given, especially trying to take care of those who are already in housing situations. And I respect that. In the brief time I've been here, it's been a pleasure to serve with you and your staff. As you can imagine, though, it's tough to watch a bill like this go forward to the full committee without at least commenting on some of the damaging consequences of this. There's an interesting fact that came out of the Recovery Act. I'm not sure it's a very popular bill in this committee. When we look at what happened with the Recovery Act, it was passed just before I got here. But I want to say about 6 or 7% of the Recovery Act was infrastructure. But if you look at it, about 2/3 of the jobs that created that were permanent came from infrastructure, right? So it told us perhaps that we should have done that the other way around, and that we were trying to bring this country back. Infrastructure would be very, very, very important, and unfortunately we're going the other way. So I understand why folks are trying to deal with these debt and deficit issues, but I think our priorities, even outside of a philosophical point of view, are unfortunately misguided. Because I think when you build a bridge, it's going to last a long time, it's going to create a lot of jobs, and it's going to serve people for a long time. I'm not sure you could say that about everything in the Recovery Act, but it's really hard against rebuilding our bridges, especially when you understand that we still face many of them facing significant risk. Tiger grants, which help fund programs in my district, leading into the Elgin O'Hare Western Access part of my district. They've been zeroed out for FY14, but not just that, $237 million in unobligated FY13 Tiger funding is being rescinded. Amtrak operations are being cut by 21%, and funding for core capacity grants, which fund desperately needed improvements to transit systems like the CTA, are unfortunately non-existent in this bill. And the housing numbers are no better, in some cases worse. Community development block grants, which fund housing investments, cut by 45%. Housing opportunities for people with AIDS will lose $32 million in critical funding used to house some of the most vulnerable among that. And again, some of this just defies, unfortunately, financial common sense, putting aside the moral obligations of taking care of those folks. People with HIV/AIDS who don't have permanent housing are much more likely to be having to be cared for in a longer period of time and not stay on their medications. And if all you care about is the money, it's going to cost us more money, but those folks are also at risk. And this bill, fortunately, allows people in public housing to stay in their homes. What about those in dire financial situations who will be forced to seek public housing this year? Sadly, we're turning our backs on them, and we're doing so even when we fund defense programs that the Pentagon doesn't even want. So I understand what happened here. We made sure the Pentagon was okay, beyond what they wanted in some respects, but a lot of other people are losing out. So, Mr. Chairman, I joined this committee to make the tough funding choices that shape our national priorities. This year's budget allocations have only taken that power away from us, forcing us to vote on a bill that drastically cuts vital services that people around the country depend on. But again, I thank you for your work on this and look forward to our continued efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Quigley. Anyone else like to make a statement? Mr. Price.
Mr. Chairman, I'll just take a minute. Sorry to be a late arrival here, but I do want to say that I appreciate the good efforts that you and the full committee chairman have made to maintain some semblance of regular order here and to work in a cooperative way to play the hand we're dealt. You know, to write a bill that is as good as we can make it. But I don't think there's any question this allocation and this larger budget situation that we're stuck in have left us with a grossly inadequate bill. This is way beyond the normal range of disagreements and difficulties with appropriations. Totally eliminating Tiger grants, decreasing substantially new starts with FTA, no funding for high-speed rail, CDBG grants cut in half, no rescinding funding for choice neighborhoods, and on and on. I've been thinking about this situation we're facing. I suppose we all have. Whether this bill aside, whether we're looking at some kind of twilight of the appropriations process, I don't think that's too dramatic a way to put it. I've never known us to be in this kind of institutional crisis. Are we totally helpless here? I know that's what we hear, that we're simply boxed in by sequestration. We're boxed in by the absence of a budget agreement. I think there's got to be some leadership exerted, perhaps outside the conventional channels here. That's been the thought behind the amendments we've offered in full committee markups about addressing this sequestration dilemma in ways that admittedly we don't usually do outside the lanes of our subcommittee jurisdictions. If somebody has a better idea, then let's hear it. But I don't think there's any group of members better equipped to understand the stakes here and to do something about it, to insist on getting beyond this this situation than appropriations members and appropriations leaders. So that's my only observation. This dilemma with this bill goes way beyond this bill. This is part of a process that is extraordinarily important to our country. The power of the purse is at the center of this institution's powers. And if appropriations is sidelined, if we're looking year after year at continuing resolutions, at investing all this effort in these bills and then having it go for naught, it won't take much of that. It won't take much of that for this committee and that function to deteriorate very, very seriously. And I just think it's important to understand that and to break out of some of the conventional arguments here and figure out how to get this fixed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Any other members like to have any comments? If not, if there are no amendments at this point, I'll recognize Mr. Wolf for a motion.
I now move that the bill and report be referred favorably to the full committee.
All those in favor will say aye. Those opposed say no. The bill is approved, and I ask unanimous consent the staff be authorized to make technical and conforming changes without objection so ordered, and I would ask everyone to leave the bill and all the copies on the table. And with that, we're adjourned. Thank you.
It's interesting because before you came in, I pretty much said the same thing, and I've been talking to people like Kay and Tom Cole.